Hi, good morning, everyone. I appreciate you joining us for this breakout session for completion. As Commissioner Lubbers mentioned, we are joined by great panelists today. So just real quick before I do introductions, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, just like with the morning session, there's a chat function. Go ahead and share that. As a heads up, when I share my screen, I can no longer see any of you or anything, so I will be getting my the questions texted to me as they come in. So that's why I'll be looking at my phone during the middle of this, just as a heads up. Additionally, we'll have 2 poll questions to take during the presentation. That can be done at the top. If you look at the little bar, the bars next to the people, clicking on that, the poll questions will show up there, and we'll prompt you when it's time to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start with introductions. My name is Josh Garrison. I'm the Associate Commissioner for Legislation and Program Implementation here with the Commission. And we are pleased to be joined by Kristen Holquist here today to talk about completion under our strategic plan. Kristen is a nationally renowned higher education expert in policy and strategy development at the state level here in Indiana. We have relied on her expertise numerous times over the years. In 2008, she joined Tara Halaska and Mike Manganiello as a founding partner of HCM Strategist. It's a public policy and advocacy consulting firm committed to reducing disparities in health and education. Through her work, she's built and continues to lead post-secondary practice that has transformed the way nonpartisan expertise is provided to advance state policies that increase attainment and close equity gaps. As I said before, we've leaned on her many times before. Additionally, she's been invited to be a witness before the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives during the 114th and 115th Congress on federal financial aid reforms. Actually, the last time I saw you speak, Kristen, was before, I think it was the Senate Help Committee back in September about FAFSA simplification. And although we know that, correlation isn't causation, 3 months later, they significantly reduced the FAFSA. So I guess we can thank you for those 70 questions being removed here in 2 years from the FAFSA. Kristen also served at the U.S. Department of Education as a senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Education as well. She was a Pell Grant recipient and is a first college graduate in her family, earning her bachelor's degrees from California Polytechnic State University and a master's degree in public policy from Georgetown. So thank you for joining us today. So.
Thank you. Good morning.
With that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And the way this will go is I'm going to go ahead and talk about a little bit about Indiana's perspective and what we've done in the completion realm, and then hand over to the expert to talk more in depth. And there will be time for questions and answers as well. So I'm going to turn on screen sharing. Okay, and all right. Kristen, can you see this just to confirm?
I sure can.
Okay. So as I mentioned, this breakout session today is about ensuring completion and the efforts that we've taken here in the state of Indiana and what's being done on a national basis to ensure completion. If you attended the opening session before Commissioner Lubbers' panel, you heard an overview of our strategic plan, Reaching Higher in the State of Change. That plan has 3 pillars: completion, equity, and talent. What we'll be discussing today is the completion portion of that. And as you heard in the Commissioner's opening section, our goals are all guided by the strategic plan, and within that is our 60% attainment goal, often called the big goal, which we adopted in 2012. And that goal is directly aligned to the workforce needs that we'll face here in Indiana in 2025. That we will need 60% of Hoosiers to have some sort of post-secondary education and training beyond high school to meet the demand of the workforce. We know today that we will need to continually upskill our populations to make sure that they're able to engage in the economy, and that if you look at since the recession, nearly all jobs created have required some sort of post-high school education. So even more important than ever, individuals must have some sort of training to be able to participate in today's economy. This has been a focus of the Commission over all of our strategic plans, completion has been a pillar that has not changed. And because of that, we've taken numerous steps over the years to encourage completion initiatives at the campus level and encourage students to complete. To cover a little bit of those items, we've worked kind of twofold. One, how do we encourage the colleges to focus on that, either through our performance fund or through our outcomes-based funding model? And then how do we encourage students to be able to enroll, so the access portion, and then ultimately have that pathway aid to complete, either through financial aid or incentives to do so. We have done that over the past decade, with more than 2/3 of our outcomes-based funding being allocated on institutions increasing their on-time and overall completion numbers. So it's not just on time, although we prefer that. It is overall completion that schools are rewarded for within our performance funding formula. If you did not know, Indiana is first in the Midwest and fourth in the nation in need-based financial aid. And since 2013, we've enacted significant reforms to our financial aid programs to ensure that students are able to complete. For example, for the 21st Century Scholarship, our Promise program here in the state of Indiana, we enacted credit completion reforms where we require our students who want to renew the 21st Century Scholarship to take enough credits to graduate on time. Otherwise, if they don't earn enough credits to graduate on time, they may be eligible for other financial aid. In addition, when we made this change, we've seen significant increases in the number of students completing the number of credits required, as well as the number of students graduating. Our most recent college completion report shows that since over the last 5 years, our 21st Century Scholars have increased their on-time graduation rate by 16 percentage points. That is greater than all students overall. Additionally, we've had other reforms, such as changes to the GPA from a 2.0 to a 2.5. These changes, when we made these changes to the financial aid programs, it provided an opportunity for many of our campus level student support staff to work with administration to provide additional supports. And some items that we saw were campuses providing additional credits for free to students. We saw housing options being provided in the summer. It allowed for our student support and our student professionals on campus to be able to work with the administration to provide the incentives and supports that were needed. In addition, we know that being prepared for college is the best way to ensure completion. So we have advocated for more early college credit. And now 64% of our high school students, as of at least 2018 cohort, earn dual credit or advanced placement, which represents an increase of 57% from 5 years ago. This also helps with on-time and overall completion. So even if an individual doesn't complete on time, maybe they're able then to go do a study abroad. Maybe they're able then to take a double major or a minor or another focus. As well as the dual credit and AP give high school students an opportunity to understand what college credit will look like and to show that they are college ready. Despite the efforts of the commission and the Herculean efforts of the colleges, we still know that completion gaps persist. This graphic comes directly from our completion report. Right now, 42.3% of our college students graduate on time, so a little less than half. This represents, over the last year, just under a 2 percentage point increase, but a 13.3 percentage point increase over the last 5 years. So the efforts that our campuses have made and the efforts that we have aligned with are having positive impacts. We do know that adult learners, low-income learners, and our minority students are less likely on time. If you look at the graphic here, you can see the breakdown of the on-time graduation rate. And if you have not seen our completion report, or I would encourage you to look at that by either your campus or your area, because it's very informative of the supports that are needed to highlight increased completion. From an extended time rate, so we know that on time is kind of the gold standard, but from an extended time rate, we're seeing about 62% of our students graduate after 6 years. This last year was a 0.2 percentage point increase and a 5.7% increase over the last 5 years. And one of the things that it's important to point out that the extended time graduation rates differ by campus. So if you look at just our main campuses, so those being, Purdue, West Lafayette, IU Bloomington, ISU, Ball State, those campuses, if you look at their graduation rate, it's at 77% of students within 6 years. However, at our 2-year campuses, it's about 37%, which outline the need for supports. One of the things that we do know is that the pandemic will have an impact on college completion and college enrollment. We're seeing that the early indicators of that right now. It's too early to define exactly what that will look like, but we know that that will be something that we have to take into consideration, and we hope that you all are as well. When we first entered the pandemic last summer, we saw an increase in the demand for summer courses. Students wanting to either complete early or get caught up from being moved to remote learning in spring of 2020. We actually saw a 10 percentage point increase in the demand for our summer financial aid, which was a little bit surprising, but welcome to see that students were trying to either speed up or get caught up. However, our overall fall enrollment decreased by 4.2%. With our public institutions and our 2-year institutions faring differently. So if you look at our 4-year public institutions, it was only down by about a percentage point. However, for our 2-year institution, it was over 10 percentage point drop. Numerous reasons for that. Many of the individuals have children at home who are at our 2-year institutions, so they likely were staying home. We actually saw that when you look at the financial aid numbers. The number of financial aid recipients with dependent children here in Indiana dropped precipitously in the fall. So we hope to bring those individuals back into post-secondary education. And I'd be remiss if I did not mention the FAFSA here with our Indiana FAFSA filing deadline of April 15th coming up. We have seen significant declines in FAFSA filing rates for our high school seniors, and we've seen some decline overall. This is a leading indicator that we would likely see lower college going rates. And this year's enrollment issue will be the future workforce issue and will be the future completion issue. So just to give you an idea of where we're sitting at here as a state as of the end of last month, looking at March 31st, we are down right now overall FAFSAs by about 2.3%. However, the bulk of that loss, nearly all of that loss, comes from our high school seniors. We're down right now 8% from this time last year for the number of high school seniors who are completing the FAFSA. Even bigger concern is when we look at the FAFSAs that Indiana has received by income level and look at those who might be Pell eligible, we see a significantly larger drop than the general population. So for all FAFSAs filed, we're down about 6.3% for the number of FAFSAs that are Pell eligible. But for the high school cohort, the class of 2021 right now, we're down 15.5% from this time last year. That represents about 2,700 students who have not filed the FAFSA. Many of these students, if not all of these students, will not be able to access post-secondary education without having completed the FAFSA. No enrollment, no completion, no FAFSA, no completion. So we do hope that those of you on this session today will help us promote the April 15th FAFSA filing deadline for the state deadline. Now there's the federal aid can be filed longer, but we would really hope that you're able to help us meet the goals around this and get more students to file the FAFSA and communicate that out broadly. So that is a quick overview, a very, very quick overview of some of the initiatives here in the state of Indiana. Before I go on, I think there are a couple questions that were texted to me before we move on to Kristen here. So the first one is Indiana's place as first in the Midwest and fourth in the nation ranked in terms of dollars or start time to offer need-based financial aid. It's based on need-based financial aid per full-time enrollment. So when we look at how much we are offering based on full-time enrollment, that is the rank, and it's ranked by the National Association of Student Grant Administrators called NASGAP. So that's where that report comes from. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand off to Kristen, and I'll move the slides. Just tell me when, okay?
Excellent. I went ahead and added a little bit of additional stats for that question about financial aid because Indiana really does deserve so much credit. And this FAFSA decline is a significant one. So I'm going to double down on Josh's recommendation to please do what we can over the next week to particularly work in some of our highest needs high schools and try and get those FAFSAs completed. They're not, the process is not yet simple. We're getting there. It'll be there in about 2 years. So just a couple words more, who is HCM's strategist? We are a public policy and advocacy firm, and we work directly with foundations, both at the national and regional level. We work with state higher education agencies, community college systems, individual institutions, charter school networks. We work with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We work with community-based organizations, advocacy organizations. We work with parent organizations, the National PTA as a client. So with all of that opportunity, I hope to be able to share a little bit about what we've learned through our client servicing. I am, as Josh said, I'm Kristen Holquist. I'm the H and HCM strategist. And I am indeed first. I'm first in the family to go to college, to complete a graduate degree, and really the first in the family to start a business. And so I have the unique American entrepreneurial experience of managing payroll during 2 recessions and 1 global pandemic. So for the next slide, you'll see, we'll pivot it one more time. This is where we were a year ago. Of course, our Weldon conference, Kurt Weldon, in honor of him. This is the level of anxiety and uncertainty that we were all living with. Things were all locked down. And in fact, this conference had been canceled. So in that time, I just want to acknowledge that we have really learned how to master Zoom as a means to both connect for work with family and with friends. And so we persevere. And in fact, I think you'll see that a lot of what Indiana is doing on completion is outstanding, and it's about persevering. I want to do what folks at the national level, and you can see I'm really, what does that mean? I'm sitting in my home office outside of Denver, Colorado. But what we try to do is ground our work in the context of what's going on with students. So in this next slide, it really provides a bit more illustration of what Josh said, that fall enrollment was down. It's down around the country. And in Indiana, it's important that there is that 10% drop off in the community college system. The first thing you'll see in this, of course, is that there was a lot of uncertainty that explained the drop off in enrollment, which could be perceived as a failure to retain students. But there are other types of explanations why students didn't attend that look more like our familiar college completion barriers. So what I'd like to do is engage all of you. We've got about 75 of us right now together. Is, as Josh said, invite you to do a poll. We've got look at the bar chart at the top right-hand corner of your chat bar, and ask you, what do you think is the top barrier students face completing a credential of value? And I invite you to, if you don't see the barrier that you identify as probably one of the top ones, is to share that in the other, also in the chat. Great. I'm seeing, if I'm looking at my results come in, that there's a fair amount of agreement that 2/3 of you, in fact, that there's just too many other life commitments that prevent people from completing. And I imagine that also includes completing on time. Let's see if there's some other comments that people have been able to share in the chat or in the poll in terms of other barriers. Well, I can honestly tell you that you're all right. That these barriers do need to be addressed collectively, and you'll hear that theme throughout my remarks. How much it's important to integrate different strategies in order to realize the kind of gains that you have seen. As Josh said, 13 points over the last 5 years. That's pretty significant in on-time completion. But we do have a way to go. His next chart, of course, showed you there are gaps, and there are gaps in terms of the distance we have to go to have the level of talent in the workplace that we heard this morning is so critical for people to want to move here and for this to be a talent hub. But also the gaps that are significant by age, by rural urban area, by race ethnicity. So that does lead to, we inevitably have to talk about what's happening with the COVID recovery. You may have heard something about this, but we really are seeing a K recovery. And it's causing a huge segment of the population to be more disconnected than ever, and particularly from the very resources that are meant to support them. And Josh showed you a little bit about what's happening with FAFSA. I have a next slide here that I think, he talked about how students with dependents, we really see a drop in FAFSA. Across the nation, it's particularly among our lowest income high schools where we're seeing a double dip in filling out the FAFSA. And as he said, this is a long tail that we have to find a way through recovery to reverse. Otherwise, any of the gains you've had over these last 5 years, they will not be sustained. So rather than be a downer, because as Ryan said this morning, his polling really shows that what's unique and strong about Indiana is your optimism, your hope for the future, and your optimism about living here. And so I wanted to kind of add on to that and say that there is this power. You are the single most important asset that Indiana has. You and the people you work with every day, you're more than just 1,000 points of light flickering in the dark. What you are is organized around what I would contend, from my national perspective, is Indiana's greatest higher education asset, and that is its metrics. There really are, starting with your 60% attainment goal, and then a set of metrics around enrollment, completion, persistence, and relationship to careers that undergird everything you do in this state. It undergirds how you report in your annual completion reports. It undergirds how you fund your colleges. It undergirds how students receive and retain their financial aid scholarships. It's in your strategic workforce plan. It's in your next level jobs work ready grants. Everyone is pointing in the same direction because you continually use the same compass, the same metrics. That is a strength. Now, I know I'm a little bit, it sounds very dry, but if you look at this next slide, I am actually here to flat out debunk this common perception that performance management is just boring. And not something that necessarily gets the juices flowing. Because what I'd like to show you is that, in fact, being able to align your resources with these metrics does provide a real strong contributor to why your completion rates are up. In this next slide, you'll see we have, thanks, Ryan, thanks, that, oopsie, go ahead and go back, that's perfect. That, the expression, what gets funded, often but not always gets results. We've had some excellent qualitative and quantitative studies done over the last couple of years. You're one of the very first states to even think about tying dollars to outcomes. And you did this as you were one of the first states to actually require that all students consider themselves college ready by completing a college preparatory curriculum for high school graduation. And so in that going first status, you're among the few states that we have the evidence that we really see increases in both credit accumulation and associate degree completion for full-time Pell enrolled students when there is a significant outcomes-based funding in place. And that is really not just new dollars. When I say significant, it's the base. We also see premiums for underrepresented students when you value their success with a differentially high reward, that we see increases particularly for Black students. Now, across the country, states are working hard to find the right balance of funding strategies. COVID threw all of this a little bit up in the air. People are concerned what happens to on-time completion. Do we hold people accountable to the same standard? But most important, what we're seeing is people continuing to maintain this important strategy, but to look at how you value the success of these priority populations. So we see states like Virginia providing extra points for when underrepresented populations transfer. We're seeing extra weights for Black, Latino, and Native American students. Alabama, one of the deep South states that are actually providing extra awards for the ability to retain and graduate their students of color. And then we're seeing more students begin to integrate their short-term credentials of value. And that's really important, as Teresa said, as part of the overall ecosystem of post-secondary production in the state. So I'll pause here and just want to confirm that both Kevin and Kate, thank you for contributing in the chat. And that really you talked about the role of counseling, and we'll get to that, because outcomes-based funding by itself does not drive the changes in behavior. It creates the overall incentive, the overall expectation, but it is that human contact and those integrated supports, and we'll talk a bit about that next. So this is just a simple slide that I'm going to refer to and show you what I mean by integration. So what we're seeing across our work, and we work right now in about 15 states. One of the states working is Iowa, for instance, with all of their community colleges, about 24 of them. But how do you take the research around the appropriate math courses in college, the research around remedial education, research around guided pathways, course mapping, research around holistic financial supports that touch on those non-tuition costs that are particularly important for those who have dependents or who are juggling work in school. And then and what we apply that research, and what we still find is that these four kind of principles need to be present in any strategy for completion. There needs to be a premium on flexibility. You can't say that enough with COVID, that we've already, as a sector, really kind of get our street creds around flexibility. You pivoted overnight online. I think you'll see in a number of places, states not only take their completion strategies, but then ask themselves, what do we not need to go back to doing now that we're reopening? What should remain a heavily technology-infused process so that we can serve more students and serve them better? So in Virginia, for instance, they're no longer going to require that students go to office hours to meet with faculty. They're going to continue to have that more frequent engagement with faculty that Zoom has facilitated. And similarly with career servicing, they're going to integrate it much more into all aspects of the instructional experience through technology. And so Virginia says, I just don't even know if we need a career office anymore. What we need to do is use our technology tools and our humans to provide more frequent information to students. So one of the things you see here is clearly communicated. And if there's anything the behavioral economics research says as it applies to our business of higher education, you got to have this so simple. I was a bit of a broken record for, it actually took about 12 years to get FAFSA simplified, but about how simple it has to be in order for it to reach the most students. And really, I can't say enough about how important it is to clearly communicate what you're doing for completion to your different stakeholders. The more complex it is, the harder it is to see results. And then this last piece is that it's really sustained the business model. And over the last couple of years, we really have been able to use our data to understand what are the upfront costs associated with investing in advising systems and different analytics systems. What's it cost to add advisors? To know what the upfront costs are, to know what's that break-even point, and what's that point in which that retention is generating sufficient tuition revenues that we're actually contributing more revenue to the overall institution. So to be able to map that and from day one describe our student success initiatives as in terms of a return on investment, and to build it and to basically engage our CFOs with our academic and student affairs colleagues day one. And so we build this in as sustainable and not a one-time nice to do expense. So that's a little bit about kind of what we've seen. But let me give you an example of how this would work for adults, because we've certainly heard that demographically, adults is the population for Hoosiers to focus on. So let me give you an example about, for instance, designing a returner package. That returner package would advertise low fixed costs, really pushing on this clear communication piece. It would advertise and make good on minimum commitments to credits transferring for prior learning, prior work experience. And they would only offer co-requisite education supports, and they would use multiple measures for placement into supports. There would be no traditional developmental education in this returner pathway. You'd work with employers and the local workforce organizations to brand and communicate the pathway so they're so clear for the learner. You'd embed work-based learning. We've talked a lot about that this morning, the importance of doing this for relevance for the learner. You'd offer comprehensive financial aid. You wouldn't just be looking at the feds to cover with a Pell Grant. You'd be looking at tuition tax benefits and helping auto-enroll people in their refundable tax benefits. You'd be looking at means-tested benefits like SNAP, and again, auto-enrolling people. You'd be looking at employer tuition reimbursement or employer scholarships. And so you'd be wrapping these around so that students' cost of living expenses can be covered. And that, again, is a key factor in retention and completion. And then last, as I said, you really have to pay attention to ROI from the get-go. So from the get-go, as you design this return pathway, you're looking at what's our break-even point and when do we recover our upfront investments. And I'll give you a couple examples. There's a wonderful tool I could refer to you that RPK has put together. But we can basically see that pathways that are significantly built around prior learning assessment and other ways of assessing non-traditional learning, that you can break even within the first 2 years. You can start generating revenue, and break even within 5 years, recovering all of your upfront assets. And then after that, this is a revenue generating program for the institution. So again, from the get-go, knowing kind of what's our plan to make sure this is a sustained pathway and not just something that we do for a few students. So in this next chart, I would say I wanted to point out to you something that we're bullish about at HCM, that you are all looking at a once in a generation opportunity to invest in your completion strategies, to invest in your talent pipeline in this state. Let me just give you an example of the billions of dollars that are going to be flowing into the system and into Indiana through a variety of means. So last week, the Federal Reserve updated their GDP estimate. They estimate that the nation would see about a 6.7% increase in GDP this year. That means income tax and sales tax receipts for Indiana and for other states will significantly be up as the economy rebounds. We have the federal government still willing to commit an additional 6% of the share of the total Medicaid costs associated with expanding eligibility up to 138%. That's a really big deal. In Indiana, Medicaid is one of your biggest expenses, and we all know it trades off against the ability to invest in higher education. So with the feds picking up more Medicaid expenses, there could be more resources for investing in higher education in this state. And then there's the range of federal economic recovery and investment efforts that are pouring billions of dollars into the state economies, into colleges directly, into training providers. You, of course, have the CARES Act, which many of you are familiar with. You've got the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. That's got $350 billion of pretty much unobligated dollars going to states. And I'm contending that if you think about a successful company invests about 15% of its annual revenue every year in research and development. It's always looking forward and finding ways to generate that next product, that next way of providing services that keeps the company relevant. Well, the states need to be the same way. So take 15% of that $350 billion and set it aside for higher education and invest in the types of completion strategies that you've been adopting and that need to be sustained. Your American Jobs Plan has money directly for community colleges. That'll be a boon for Ivy Tech, but you've also got it for MSIs, and you have a number of those in your state. And then, of course, there's infrastructure investments therein. And then today, the president just announced his FY 2022 budget. He did release it, or OMB did release it, if you will, while we were listening to Teresa. So I have not been able to analyze it, but I'm predicting there's some money in there for free community college from the Fed. So we have to think about how we take this once in a generation opportunity and really do things differently for talent development. And so that concludes my overview of remarks, but I have time with Josh. We're going to go through some questions. We'll take your questions. This map will stay up here because here are some states where what's going on I'll probably try and point to as I can.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate that. I have some questions here. Again, since I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see the chat. So are there any questions in the chat you'd like to address first, or can I go ahead and ask you what I've written down?
I don't see any.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'll go ahead. So in the keynote, we talked about higher education's role in economic recovery, as well as how it increases, well-being, quality of life, etc. With your national perspective, how do you see higher ed's role in Indiana's growth and recovery? I know you kind of touched on that just a second ago, but if you could elaborate just a little bit more.
Sure. I think the most important thing we need to take from this morning, and so I'm going to repeat, is what Mark said. Well-being and pay are varying significantly by region in your state. And so there's really no way forward for Indiana or for the nation if it doesn't look at these underserved communities the way an investor would look at an undervalued asset. We have to buy. You have to invest in these communities. We've heard them described as opportunity zones, but look at these populations and communities as those priorities for investment by the state and by us professionals, where we will be able to set forward a different path than we have now.
That's great. Can you elaborate on what HCM Strategist is doing to help engage states and any individual institutions on the issue of completion and maybe some of the best practices that you've seen?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So there's a couple different projects that we're involved in. One that we're doing speaks to this need to signal low tuition. We certainly have heard it nationally in the trend for free community college. But in a way, if you think about it, you were one of the first states to signal low tuition to your 21st century scholars. Yeah. Together with the feds and with the state, and then with each of you institutions, you were able to tell 21st century scholars, if you do what you need to do, stay in school. I guess when Governor Bayh was governor, it was first created, it was just please stay in school and don't do drugs. Over time, our expectations of students grew in the state. But if you prepared yourself for college and graduated, that you would be able to go to Indiana, college in Indiana for free with certain partnering institutions. That is a powerful message. So we're working with a number of states on what would it look like to design the business model to be able to offer to sets of students, again, priority populations, a guaranteed affordability commitment. And that's not locking in tuition. That's thinking about what does it look like to change the entire financing strategy for a set of students so that they can predictably access a more affordable path. We're working with the Iowa community colleges, as I mentioned, trying to use an equity lens to try and adopt holistic guided pathways. We're really following the example. I like to look at what Georgia's done. They, like you, have had big gains in completion, about 9 points in the last 5 years. But what they've really done is they've completely system-wide gotten rid of traditional developmental education. All needs to upgrade skills are embedded in regular credit-bearing courses. And what's happening as a result is that you are seeing not just retention in those classes, but retention in then the gateway math and English courses by phenomenal gaps. So take math. 29% of students to be successful in their math courses when they were taking traditional remedial education first, but with an embedded course, you're seeing a 67% course completion rate. And that's one of those key metrics that you use that is a milestone for predicting completion. In Georgia, regardless what your ACT score is, they have dramatically higher course completion rates in their gateway English and math courses because they have systematically gotten rid of traditional developmental education. And they also have embraced intensity of enrollment. And I know that's hard. As we said, 60% of students, of you think that the complexity of people's lives makes that intense on-time enrollment real challenging. But being able to revise how we advise and how we support students financially and with academic advising makes a big difference in promoting intensity. It doesn't take away the importance of intensity. We see that from both the Georgia study and then from a national study, that being able to just take 15 credits in that first semester significantly increases the likelihood that you will graduate in 6 years versus taking 12 to 14. And mind you, the federal standard is just 12 to maintain your federal financial aid. So we've got an artificially low standard, a default 5-year graduation plan if you're on federal financial aid. So it's really intentionally stating intensity that helps make a difference. And that's some of the work we're promoting in Iowa. I think the things I also want to point out, as I mentioned to you in our last slide, is what we're beginning to do is work with a number of states. Last week was Oregon and with their governor. But how do you really look at the federal dollars that are coming down, both directly to you institutions who are here in this breakout, but also to the state, to make sure that you are spending them in a very different way. Their short-term dollars, their investment dollars, and how do you focus them on these completion pathways that are aligned to careers, to invest in the types of broadband that would allow the enterprise to be more digital and accessible. This is a significant opportunity. So we're working with states on how to think differently about that, and how to think differently about that in coalitions of institutions. So that's a little bit about what we're doing, and that's why we kind of share the same optimism you Hoosiers do that Jake talked about earlier.
Yeah, that's great information, particularly whenever you're talking about the credit intensity, and that's something that we've worked here on with our 21st Century Scholars and the credit completion requirements, the 15 to finish, knowing that it's not a one size fits all policy. But as we went around the state, 6-7 years ago now to talk about that, I can't tell you the number of sessions we did where we asked, how many of you are going to graduate within 4 years, and every hand would go up, and how many of you are taking 15 credits, and like 3 hands would go up at the time, not understanding that they wouldn't be able to graduate in 4 years if they weren't taking enough. And then so many of our scholars being left with that 5th year with no funding afterwards, and having to stop at that point. So that has been a key role or item in increasing completion, especially amongst our 21st century scholars and our other low-income students. So that's great. As a Hoosier transplant, coming here from 3 other Midwestern states, I was surprised at how spoiled we are here with the 21st Century Scholarship, and how I was in Iowa, and I was in Illinois, and I was in Michigan, and how much those states would love to have a program like that to do exactly what you're talk about that low cost in that pathway. So appreciate that. What and I think you touched on this a little bit, but are there any other efforts that you've seen in other states that have helped with completion?
Affordability strategies?
Yes.
Sure. Well, so again, looking at our little map as a handy, your neighbor to the north, where in Michigan do you live? Look at the hand. They have done something that I think all of us can look pretty seriously at. There are a myriad of policies that prevent adult students who attended some college and accrued bills and sometimes debt that prevents them from being able to return. There are holds on their transcripts and inability to re-enroll until they pay their bills. This is the case in a number of states. And in fact, what we're seeing in Michigan, Wayne State, they call it the Michigan Warrior Way Back. And what that is a institution-wide forgiveness or amnesty from any debts that were owed. Please come back. And then to take those students and re-enroll them in a path where their prior learning is credited toward the credential, and they really basically get a fresh start financially. And so that idea of institutional debt forgiveness, you can imagine that it affects our lowest income students and our Black and Latino students the most. That type of amnesty is actually now going to be supported by the federal financial aid dollars, the HERF dollars we heard on March 19th, that you can use those funds to forgive the institutional debt of any student who was enrolled during the pandemic. And so to the extent that you have the capacity on your campus to identify who dropped out, who hasn't returned, and what does their outstanding balances look like, go find them, give them these emergency dollars that the federal government has provided. Let's get them re-enrolled. And so that's an affordability strategy I'd encourage you to look at.
That's a great idea. I had not heard of that initiative, so that's been something that is, when we launched You Can Go Back, the locking of transcripts was a huge barrier for us to get adults to return. So I'm definitely going to look into that program. That sounds great. I think this was touched on in the questions earlier as well, but how do we engage our communities and students earlier in their educational careers in the pipeline to drive home that importance that they need to complete a degree or credential beyond high school?
Sure. I was thinking, I just in the chat was interacting with one of our colleagues, Kevin. Is it Kevin? Pardon me, I'm trying to look at this. But, Teresa mentioned this. Career relevance is not a buzz. It actually is critical for people to visualize themselves as learners, that should take advantage of post-secondary education. We've talked about this kind of necessity of not just career relevance, but also then just clarity around how affordable this is. People are concerned about accruing debt and not being able to get a good job. People are concerned about accruing debt and having to drop out and still owing that. And as we know, it's a very difficult debt to discharge. So I like strategies that are innovative, again, regional. We just heard that all this morning. And Indiana has vibrant regions. They're very different, but in each one of them, what would something look like the San Diego Workforce Partnership? Here you take the workforce board, you take the post-secondary institutions in the community. In this case, it's the University of California at San Diego. They worked with a number of philanthropies and community-based organizations. They are working with employers, and what they're doing is reaching out to learners, and they've created income share agreements that say, here are a number of paths that are growing. We'll guarantee you a job in one of these with one of these employer partners. There is no upfront cost to you. To enroll in our program, earn our certificate. If you make more than $40,000, then you can start repaying the cost for earning the certificate. But it is basically a risk that's borne by the education providers up until that point of return. And so if you think about being a learner who has dropped out, who's not filling out the FAFSA, who's not returning in the fall, who's juggling children, who's sitting potentially in a region where they don't necessarily can see the connection, this ability to put these branded pathways together and take the risk off of the learner for starting and instead putting it on the back end, this is very promising. And I'm pleased to see that this is taking off in San Diego, and that's why California's here in the map.
Great.
I also say, though, that Cindy and Kate are offering excellent comments about dual enrollment and dual credit. And in fact, you do have a vibrant program. I recall that, Josh, one of your stats was about its increase in credit accumulation. The ability to transcript those credits into a particular career pathway and to marry that with early career advice in high school is an incredible opportunity, probably not as often communicated to students and kind of committed to by institutions as needed, but this is an outstanding way to take learning and make it relevant early and to see the connection to post-sec. So I think that is an outstanding tool you have to continue to build on. And it looks like, Cindy, you would concur.
All right, we have about 7 more minutes before we have to jump off here, but I have one more question, and if there are any questions in the chat, we encourage you to go ahead and ask them. So as you've worked with states to help move the needle, even as you've worked with Indiana in the past, what would you identify as some of the biggest challenges that we face? And that's kind of broad, but what are some of the bigger challenges that you've seen across the states that you've worked with?
Sure. So, the first is this ability to be, what is our capacity as a system, as communities, to be able to integrate, as we talked about. So do you look across your institution, across your region, at your post-secondary pathways as completion pathways with an equity lens? Have you planned for them to be when I say scale, is it the path that we expect all of our students to be on? They have to actually default out of them, just like we had to default out of the Core 40 for a high school graduation path. Have we set up a continuous feedback loop from students, from employers, and from faculty, from the student affairs professionals that advise them about improving how we do our work? Have we really set that up to be systemic? And again, have we built this to be a sustainable part of our model, or is this what we do on the side in this one office on campus? And so to me, it's just that really ability to say, we know what works, but do we do it across the board? And so there, I really come back to another challenge is money. And everyone would agree and say, yes, we need more money, but we need the dollars focused on the priority populations and the strategies that work. And we need to be able to look at existing resources as a source of new dollars by using ROI models. And that then gets down to will. And what I see often, and I'm a trustee of a HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution here in Colorado, Metro State University, Denver. And we have a racial justice imperative as a board. We have outstanding pathways for students. Our completion rates continue to struggle because the state has significantly and systematically underfunded our institutions. So we serve the most Blacks and Latinos in the state, and we get the lowest dollars per state. So there really needs to be will. And that's will on the part of taxpayers, and that's will on the part of legislatures to really address some systemic inequities where the institutions that enroll the most at-risk students are the least well-funded. So those are some of the challenges I see. But I continue to remain optimistic that this is a great moment in time.
Yeah, and do you think, just to build off that, this one-time funding from the federal government, especially around CARES or the Consolidated Appropriations or the American Rescue Plan, do you think this is kind of the time for those innovative strategies to try to fund some items or to prove the value right now? Do you think, because you're talking
Absolutely.
about continuous ROI,
Mhm.
right now would kind of be the opportunity to do that, right?
It is absolutely the opportunity to, and why don't I answer your question and integrate a question from Sean Tierney, who's joined us, your colleague from the commission.
Yeah.
Um, you know, what we're able to do with those one-time dollars, whether that's institutions spending them or the state setting aside the dollars and then systematically investing them. Prior learning assessments and the ability to embed those in pathways, that has the ability to validate that students are going to be successful. That helps promote some of the social emotional qualities that are related to completion. It can shorten time to degree. But they're often not embedded ways of actually moving toward completion. And so being able to stand up those assessments, being able to work with faculty to revise the pathways so that they're an integral part, and then changing any part of the business model, that just takes time and money. But we have time and money in the next 2 years to redesign some of those returner pathways, as I was just describing.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen so I can, if this will work. Um, there we go. Sorry, I couldn't. I've been staring at the slides instead of anything else. So yeah, and to kind of toot Sean's horn here, he led an effort to ensure that our financial aid funding would be able to fund prior learning assessments here a few years back. So we've had that. There was a question earlier I did want to address that it mentioned the extension of our FAFSA filing deadline for the 21-22 year. That there's a potential for that, but there's never a guarantee. We might be able to do that, Darla, but we would much prefer that students go ahead and file the FAFSA now and get that done and catch them here rather than to have to extend it out like we did in years prior. But we'll see here in about 6 days if we have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
With that, one of the other things that we hear about all the time whenever we talk about higher education are the emerging new types of programs. So whether that's new providers, new pathways. Do you view that as a way to increase overall completion? And are there any states that are doing a job of ensuring that ensuring quality of those programs as we integrate those new and emerging pathways into the broader higher education ecosystem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that what we've been able to do in Indiana, you are a leader in this regard. We've been able to be much clearer about the competencies associated with different professions and also different degree programs. And so with that common language, we can be transparent about learning milestones and create small micro badges and learning kind of certificates that basically tell the learner you're a complete, and then tie that to the regular labor market data we have. We can work with our employers to do competency-based hiring. So in California, they are intentionally working with a group of employers across the state and what's now their statewide online community college to do just that, is to create reciprocal relationships whereby the paths are competency-based and the hiring that they're preparing for is competency-based. And then the other thing I would just say is that as new models come online, there is a value in the state role to just kind of have minimal levels of consumer protection. And again, that's where your labor market data is so key. And I think the way you've set up your work ready grants really creates a good framework for this, because you've already done some of that analytic work. So it's not redoing it, it's taking what you've already invested in and really, again, driving this into the regions to work with employers. And in Indiana, these are going to be small employers. So they're going to need our organizations our community-based organizations that are here at the Weldon conference to play that linking role, because they don't have big HR offices like companies have.
Well, Kristen, really appreciate you joining us today and providing great insight. I've got a page full of notes now of actions that I need to take here after hearing you talk today. So with that, I'm getting it's time to wrap it up here. And if there are any more questions, we can maybe do one more. Otherwise, we'll need to go back to the main page here for the governor's address here. So with that, couple more seconds, and Kristen, if you have any closing comments, feel free. So
no, I think the next there, you're welcome to anyone's welcome to email me and follow up. Cindy, I see you have a great note. I've got a solution for you on how you can get those students who are just one class away to become completers. So please know that I'm here to be a resource for you.
All right. Well, with that, again, thank you. And if you want to go ahead and join into the main session, the governor's comments will start here in about 4 minutes. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Indiana. Take care.